We are back with Big Sky Big Takes, week number 6. I'm your host for this one, folks, Colby Peterson. On the show this time around, first podcast, we were talking about this before we started the stream here. Montana Parlay, first podcast of the season for him, and he's doing Big Sky Big Takes. Parlay, how you doing, man?
Doing all right. You know, it's a lot of pressure here. Like a couple other guys had some other commitments. You know, I'm left here exposed. My takes are just all my terrible takes are going to be exposed. I have no one to pick me up. You know, Nuge can't save me with, or Brent can't bring any knowledge. Nate can't, defer with some humor. So I'm stuck. Bear Tycoon can't make me look good with his worst take. So I don't know what I'm going to do today.
Well, I'm sure you're going to be just fine, man. I mean, if you folks don't know, we have a Big Sky Podcast Network Twitter chat, and so everybody's kind of in there talking about whatever's going on a particular weekend. We talk throughout the week, and so Parlay, you're all right, man. You got good takes. I think you're going to be just fine. But we do want to say that there may be some folks to hop on a little bit later. So if that happens, we will welcome them. But as it sits right now, you've got just Colby Peterson from Weber State Weekly and Montana Parlay. So let's talk a little bit about the show, man. So if you know the format of Big Sky Big Takes, we're going to talk about 3 of what we feel are the most impactful matchups of the last week. And so for this week, a little bit of slim pickings. We had 2 key members of the Big Sky on bye, and that's Montana and Idaho. They'll be back facing each other this next weekend. But so those guys, no games for them. And so for us this week, we'll be talking about Idaho State making the trip up to Bozeman to face your Montana State Bobcats, right, Parlay?
Idaho State, Montana State last week.
Yep, that game happened. Then we'll also be talking about Northern Colorado taking the trip out to Sac State, and we'll talk about how that went.
Oh yeah.
And then finally we'll wrap up with Eastern Washington taking the trip down to Ogden to face number 7 Weber State.
Yes.
Which is obviously a game that I watched because it was our homecoming game, and I'm a Wildcat guy. So. But before we get into all that, man, want to encourage everybody. This show is put on in conjunction with the FCS Fans Nation Network. And so want to encourage you to go check out all of the good content that exists on this YouTube channel. If you're listening to it on YouTube or through one of those channels, of course, you may be listening to it through one of the Big Sky Podcast Network members. So that's nice, and we'll talk about them in just a second. But make sure you're checking out the FCS Fans Nation Network because there are a lot of good content. They're talking about the FCS broadly. I've been learning a lot about the SWAC, guys, and it's all thanks to the FCS Fans Nation guys. So I'm really interested to understand who is SWAC because apparently that's a question that's been raised in the last week. But we also want to shout out some of our fellow Big Sky Podcast Network members. If you're listening to this show on that network, you may be listening to Tubbs at the Club. You may be listening to the Grizz Fan Pod. You may be listening to R&R Catcast, our friends talking about Montana State, the 2 Ryans. You may be hearing this at Weber State Weekly. You may be hearing this at, Eagles Power Hour, which is technically a member of the FCS Fans Nation Network. But am I leaving anybody out there, Parlay? I think I got everybody, but I just want to make sure I didn't ditch anybody. Oh, we got the NAU sports show as well with Casey. I think that's everybody.
Good enough for me.
Yeah, good enough for you. But all right, man. Let's talk a little bit now that we've sort of taken care of business. We've gone through all the stuff. We've talked to everybody. Let's talk a little bit about Big Sky football. So let's start out with a game that I'm sure you were very interested in as a Montana State guy, right? So we'll talk a little bit about Idaho State taking the trip up to Bozeman to face the Bobcats. Probably give me your kind of initial reactions with this one. I think everybody sort of understood that this was going to be a game where maybe the Bobcats were going to continue to kind of tune things up as their schedule gets stiffer. Like how did you all as Cat fans see this game going into it? Because we know the problems that Idaho State has had this season and of course in seasons past, but especially with the new head coach this year.
Well, it was, and I'm going to take a look at things a lot from like the gambling perspective as far as what the lines were ahead of the game. What I bet on, who covered, because as far as what the matchups are, the X's and the O's, that's not my specialty, at least not now. When we were talking earlier, this is the first week I've actually been able to sit down and watch some football, at least on an actual TV screen. I've been playing some rec sports in my men's baseball league at playoffs, so this is the first time I was at home watching a TV rather than catching bits and pieces on ESPN Plus on my phone every once in a while. So it was nice to sit back and watch a game. We're also talking, there haven't been marquee matchups yet this year in the Big Sky. I mean, MSU at Eastern, Weber Eastern, we'll get into that later, but Eastern's just going through such a tough schedule, and they're just getting all these tough games at the wrong time. So it's not like, I'm going to take too much from it, except, all right, Montana had a close game against Idaho State. So a little bit of bragging rights if we can come out and smash them, which we should. Now, I think football wise, if you take a look at the box scores of both games, and take into consideration that our game was at home, which is a little better atmosphere for our team than Holt Arena for any visiting team. I don't know what the spread difference is when you take, say a home game in Montana at either Wagriz or in Bozeman versus going to Holt. That spread difference is a little bit more than the 3-point swing on both sides, I would guess. So we had 6 turnovers in that game. Montana State was giving up some yards on some drives, but every time they sniffed the red zone, they turned the ball over. And that's what a good team will do to a bad team, when things are breaking their way. I know, like when the Grizz played them, they had 2 fumbles, turned it over twice. Idaho State had 4 fumbles and kept it every time. So it's like we took all the, good luck that Idaho State had from last week and flipped it on them at our home field and just kicked the crap out of them. The spread was 25.5. I bet on the Cats. I felt like that was low, considering all the factors, and probably was low because they kept it close with the Grizz the week before. And actually, even though it seemed like we were just winning by 40 the whole game, that gambling wise, that came into play towards the end. Like, it just would have taken one little freak touchdown, one little garbage time touchdown, one little turnover by the Bobcats late when they got their second and third string in, and I wouldn't have won that bet. But they ended up taking it 37-6, and Chambers once again looked really good. So that'll make for some interesting talking points next week, or this game coming up.
Certainly, right? And like you said, a really important thing to consider going into this one is that Idaho State right now, the 11th out of 12th rushing defense in the Big Sky. Guess who's number one at the number one rushing offense in the Big Sky, far and away? Why, it's the Montana Bobcats. Or the Montana State Bobcats. And so you sort of you look at that, and it's not, I mean, when I look at running the ball, there's less to worry about, right? It's not like the passing game where it takes, yes, if you're a prolific passer, there are things that you can do. Running the ball is running the ball, man. And so if Idaho State was going to really struggle to contain the Montana State offense on the ground, it was going to be a long day for the Stripes. And that's exactly what happened, right? Like when you look, I don't think that they threw for a touchdown. They were all rushing touchdowns for the entire game. That's what they wanted to do. And they didn't have to take that risk, right? They didn't have to even try the air because they didn't need to. You can just hand the ball off to a number of great backs, or, in the case of Sean Chambers, a combo quarterback / running back. The dude's he's just a unit. And, but no touchdowns thrown for him, only 150 yards passing, but he didn't need it. They just ran the ball all over him.
It's like baseball playoffs are on now,
Yes, they are.
If your pitcher's throwing good heat and the batter is way behind it, you never throw the changeup or the curveball. If he looks like he's swinging a sword at the fastball, you stick with the fastball. Same thing in this game. They can't stop the run. Why the hell would you pass the ball? And you're exactly right. The Cats had 4 rushing touchdowns, a couple field goals. Didn't throw for a touchdown, not a single passing touchdown. So, but why? Why would you?
Yeah, you don't need to take that risk.
Just so they did what they needed to do at home. Homecoming, big crowd, and honestly, Idaho State, picking up some garbage time touchdowns and capitalizing on turnovers to get within 8 points of the Grizz at home was probably their Super Bowl for this year.
Yeah, it seems like they have one of those every year, right? Last year, it was when they beat Davis, right? It was like, what? Idaho State beat Davis? Like, what? Because Davis was a playoff team. Of course, they lost in the first round. But, that was a stunning loss by the Aggies on the road in Pocatello. And so it seems like the Stripes have one of those in them every year. Of course, the Grizz pull the win out of Pocatello and get to go back to Missoula on a win streak into the bye week. But I agree with you, Parlay. Like going into this, it was like, okay, if the Grizz played worse than what the Bobcats are going to play against the Stripes, that can maybe give us a glimpse of what we might see later in the season. And that's what happened, right? Like the Bobcats did what they were going to do, and they ran the ball on them, and the game was never in question. Idaho State scores in the first quarter. They score a touchdown. They missed the extra point, and that was all the points they scored. They never made a trip back to the end zone.
It was
and
a minute and a half game.
Right. And that was it, right? Like that was all of the offense. That was as close as they were going to get. So going down and taking a look at red zone chances, they actually never even got to the red zone because of the way that touchdown came. They ended up, it was a 36-yard pass to from Gronauer to James. And so technically the Stripes never sniffed the red zone because the Montana State defense just shut them down. They couldn't get close.
Yeah, and turnovers came into play, and there's a certain amount of luck with that. But, when you're the better team, you're putting pressure on a team. It's going to happen. And, Idaho State felt like they had to pass the ball. They had to force things. But, 6-0 turnover margin, that's not going to end well, no matter who you are. And when you're probably one of the worst teams in the FCS, it's really going to be bad. So, I mean, the more I talk like it that way, we should have won by 50. So, reality check, they're bad. They turned the ball over a lot, but we did what we had to do.
Yeah. So question to you, because a lot of the Bobcats, and we talked about this, I think, last week or the week before, about the fact that the Bobcats lost a lot of guys on defense, guys who are playing in the NFL now, guys like Daniel Hardy, guys like Troy Anderson. I mean, and so that front seven lost some really key guys. And so in this one, Montana State comes away with just one sack on an Idaho State team that is not necessarily very prolific in defending the quarterback, right? Like looking at the conference stats right now, I mean, Idaho State ranks currently in the conference. They rank 11th out of 12 in sacks given up. The Bobcats only mustered one sack against Idaho State. I mean, as a Bobcat fan, how are you feeling about that performance? Because it feels like right now the Bobcats not getting home maybe as much as maybe Bobcat fans would like. Right now, they're second in the conference with 15. So it's like, yeah, well, that was just one game. But you look at the competition thus far, and it's like, man, I mean, is that a concern for Bobcat fans at all? Or is it just like, it's not that big a deal?
The defense is a huge concern for all of us Bobcat fans. I mean,
fair.
We made it to the championship last year, and we lost guys to the NFL, like you said. So
legit guys that I watched play in Ogden last season who were dudes.
Yeah, like Hardy went to a whole nother level in the
playoffs.
Incredible. Just unbelievable what he did in those games against Sam Houston and South Dakota State. So when you lose a guy like that, obviously, you don't need to say much about Anderson. I mean, he lost him too, obviously. So
just an athlete.
And then looking at how we've performed at certain points against Eastern and, here and there and against other teams, it's like, oh boy, what's going to happen when we play, Montana or Sac? Let's see, who do we even play? We've got a pretty favorable schedule. That's the thing, is our schedule is very favorable. But it makes me nervous for when we play a great offense or even a good offense. But what helps, I've been following the Bobcats for a while, is when you have a good running team and you can control that clock, that is so helpful for the defense. There were those teams under Ash and with some of those quick strike offenses. Guys, we just aired it out with McGee and Prukop that we'd score so quick and our defense was not very good. And then they'd go back out there and they'd give up a quick one. So that's, the one saving grace with our, we're nowhere near where we were last year, is they can rest. So they'll be able to figure some things out, keep guys fresh, and hopefully find a way to get some pressure against these better teams that we're going to be seeing here in the next couple weeks.
Yeah, because I took a look at the upcoming schedule for the Bobcats, and in my view, there are two really important games. I think the Bobcats are a playoff team. I think they will get in the playoffs. Looking at the schedule, it's very favorable. Like you said, the Bobcats have played very tough schedules. If you know anything about the Big Sky, teams will play each other every, you'll play each other twice in a 3-year period. So you'll always have a year off. I feel like this is the Bobcats' year off on some of those really, really tough teams. And so this year, obviously, they're going to play the Grizz every single year because that's what it is. But this year so far, I mean, it's just they played Eastern, who's having a really tough go because there's some stuff to work on there, and then Weber, and then of course they'll play the Grizz at the end of the season. And so remaining are just the Weber game and that Grizz game. And so it looks like pretty good odds that Montana State is going to make the playoffs right now. And so Cat fans have to be feeling pretty good about that. But my other question about that is that right now, the Bobcats are dead last in the conference in passing yards. Of course, they haven't needed to pass because they're number one in rushing offense, right? They're absolutely crushing it, averaging 289 yards a game. It's just a bonkers number on the ground, right? But my question to you, Parlay, is that there are a couple of tough run defenses coming. Are there concerns that should the rushing offense not be as productive as it needs to be in those situations, that they can get it done through the air?
Yes. I mean, it's hard to know because we've got some issues going on with QB, like as far as Tommy going out and Chambers. Just if you've watched him run, I mean, he doesn't need to throw in it, and he did make some great throws in that Davis game.
So that's what I was going to say. He threw some absolute dimes in that game.
He was throwing dimes, and whether Tommy can do that too, I try not to be too much of a pessimist. Others in the chat might say I'm too much, and some of it's the old, reverse jinx for the gambling angle. But when you watch that run the Bobcats went on last year, now in hindsight, is like how much of that was just the magic of Tommy, and how much of it was once again an NFL talent in Lance McCutcheon? Because
tough matchup.
That was some of the biggest plays we had in that playoff run, was just throwing those bombs to Lance McCutcheon. And whether you're throwing it directly to him or not, he's going to garner some attention. And we got some dudes now that are making some great plays on the few times we are passing it. But what it comes down to, whether we're talking defense, passing game, anything, and I don't care if it's the Bobcats, the Grizz, heck, Weber, Sac, any of these teams that are at the top of the Big Sky, we haven't been tested yet. We have not been tested yet this year. So, it's kind of speculation, but what's cool is we're going to find out real quick, over the next
couple weeks, right?
Yeah.
I mean, a couple of weeks, the Wildcats will be taking the trip up to Bozeman to face the Bobcats at Bobcat Stadium. It's a massive game. Big playoff implications, obviously. And also very interested to see how that game shakes out, because it will determine the Big Sky pecking order. And as we've talked about in the past couple of weeks for doing the Big Sky Big Takes here, it's, man, like the Big Sky is really, really deep at the top this year. I mean, there are 5 potential playoff teams. If you include Idaho and you believe that they can be competitive against the top of the conference, we'll find out this weekend how competitive they can be. But signs have been good for the Vandals. And so we'll see just exactly how many teams the Big Sky can get in. But I mean, the next few weeks will determine that pecking order and who gets that auto bid and what things look like in that playoff bracket in the weeks to come.
Yeah, and Brian from Tubbs at the club puts out that Power Poll, it's a great thing he does. He's got a Sunday night podcast. We vote, we talk, and that I look at those top teams that we like to give each other crap sometimes. Who should be one? Who should be two, three, four?
Of course.
How do you even know? At the end of the day, what's cool, we'll find out in 2 to 3 weeks.
Yeah, we are going to find out.
We're going to find out. It'd be nice if we could play SAC and all play each other. I'm kind of happy we don't, though, as Montana State fans. So, but everyone else kind of plays each other going forward. Davis and Eastern, they might be just as good as a lot of the other teams in the top 5, but the schedule did not work in their favor this year.
Yeah, that's true. You look at Davis, they faced South Dakota State, in Brookings, lost a close one. They faced Weber at home, lost a close one. They faced you guys and got hammered.
Night game.
Yeah. And that's another tough team. Like, that's just another top 10 matchup that they had to deal with. And so it's hard. That's just a really tough schedule.
Who knows where any of the other teams would be with that same schedule, whether it's Bobcats, Weber, Grizz. Chances are they would have lost at least one, if not 2 of those games as well. Not all of them like Davis, but probably at least one.
Yeah. So any final thoughts on Bobcats Stripes that you want to get out there before we move on to Northern Colorado versus Sac State?
I don't want to overthink. I've probably said enough on playing one of the worst teams in the FCS. So let's move on.
Yeah. All right. So obviously, like we said, Bobcats roll. They end up getting the dub. The Stripes, they scored just that lone touchdown in the first quarter. And so 37-6. Game is never in question. Take care of business at home for homecoming, no less. So let's talk a little bit about Northern Colorado. Now, we just talked about one of the worst teams in the FCS. But it's weird because NoCo lost to Houston Christian earlier in the season. That raised some eyebrows. Houston Christian, not a very good team. They barely beat Lamar down in Texas. Not a very quality win, right? And then all of a sudden, they beat the Stripes, and so they're feeling froggy, but they've got to go to Sacramento and take on Sac State. That doesn't go so well. The Bears just get absolutely hammered by the Hornets. They lose this one 55-7. It was never in doubt. It was 24-0 at halftime. And then the Hornets go on to score 21 more points in the third quarter. It was never in doubt, man. So, give me your thoughts on this one. Obviously we knew that the Hornets were going to win because they've shown their quality. The thing that we've talked about is that every single opponent that they've faced this year, they've taken care of business every single time. That includes an FBS win over Colorado State on the road in Fort Collins, plus a win over Northern Iowa on the road in Iowa. And so, I think that maybe Sac State isn't getting the attention that they deserve, considering the resume. I have to admit that I haven't given them the attention that they deserve, but Parley, give me your thoughts on the Hornets right now and kind of where they're at.
You got to wonder what Elijah Dodson was thinking and how he feels going back to this team. It's like if you break up with your girlfriend and then she becomes a supermodel, and I don't know. I'm working on a terrible. I probably shouldn't even continue that there, but man, that's got to be rough. Just you're on a good team, you go back, you join the Bears, and you get beat 55-7. I'll tell you, when I wake up every Saturday, I check the lines, and these books are getting lazier and lazier on the FCS lines. Sometimes don't post them till 2 hours before game time. Yeah. This one was Sac State minus 29.5. And that's a lot of points.
Yeah.
But anything less than 30 was crazy in this game.
Yep.
So I loaded up on Sac and, wasn't disappointed. I don't know what the bookmakers were thinking when they made that line. Idaho, they're playing great this year, but they put up 56 on Northern Colorado, and you knew that Northern Colorado was not going to score as many as they did in that game here against Sac. Again, Sac is doing what they have to do against the competition they're playing.
Yeah.
They're not really playing much. I mean, they had the big FBS win again. Mountain West stinks, so I'm really looking forward for that game when they're the back-to-back weeks. They face Weber in Montana back-to-back. Is that a
Yeah,
no?
I think the Grizz go to Sac, I think, and then the next week the Hornets have to come to us. No, that doesn't work because we actually play the Grizz. But yeah, there is back-to-back weeks where they have to play the Grizz and they have to play us.
Yeah.
But one statistic that somebody noted in a Facebook group, and it might have been the FCS Fans Nation Facebook group actually, was that in the Troy Taylor era in Sacramento, the Hornets have not lost a Big Sky road game. Hasn't happened.
And they seem to be so good on the road.
Yeah, they are dominant. I mean, they had the win at Wash Grizz last season. Stunning win. It was like, wow. Because the Grizz were no slouches last year. It was a playoff team, quarterfinal team, but Sac went up there and took care of business.
And looking at this box score here, Sac had 332 yards rushing. They had 5 guys with at least 6 carries. Just pretty much looks like they did whatever they wanted to against Northern Colorado. And again, I don't know what to take from this game. It's just, man, they're just blowing teams out. Everyone they faced. It'll be really interesting to see. Even this week, they face off against Eastern on the Inferno.
Mm-hmm.
So that's probably the best matchup, even taking into account their game at Colorado State. Although Colorado State went and beat Nevada in Nevada, even though Nevada sucks. I mean,
that sucks.
I mean, that's FBS.
Sure.
Sac beat the living hell out of Colorado State at Colorado State. So it's not like, I don't know. Again, let's see what happens when the good teams start playing each other. But it's hard not to be impressed by Sac so far.
Yeah. A couple of things to note with Sac. I mean, a name that maybe isn't getting the attention that it should, Cameron Scatabo. Scatabo had 124 yards on 18 carries in this game. That is a 6.9 yard average. Every time that man touched the ball, you had 7 yards. Only lost a single yard in that game. So that's who that guy is.
And I don't know if this ESPN's correct. It says as long as 17. So he's just basically grinding out runs that are all around that, 6 to 12, 15 yard run per run. And that's crazy. Because usually when a guy averages 6.9, I think you brought this up last week but with another running back, is he's got that 60-yard run, that 50-yard run. But if you're averaging 6.9 and you're long 17, it's like, all right, 2 handoffs, first down every time.
Yep. Every time. So right now, Scatabo leading the Big Sky Conference in yards, 539 yards, averaging 8 per game, per carry. I mean, he's averaging 107 per game. Scatabo right now, potentially looking like maybe a conference offensive player of the year. I mean, just the impact that he's having. And so you talked about Elijah Dodson, who just transferred away from Sac State to go play at Northern Colorado. Had to play his old team this weekend. Didn't go so well for him. He ends up just netting 50 yards. It wasn't awesome for him, but on 16 carries, 3.1 yard average with 1 touchdown. He scored the lone touchdown for them. It's tough when you have to, turn around. And I don't know what he saw in Northern Colorado as a program to say, hey, I'm going to go there. But I think maybe after seeing Cameron Scatabo's performance thus far this season, maybe we kind of understand why he chose to transfer, because the writing might have been on the wall that the coaching staff favored him, Scatabo, over Dodson. And so it was like, well, I want to play, so I'm going to go play somewhere else. Unfortunately, that somewhere else was Greeley, and it's been a really tough row to hoe there.
Some people would rather try to be the best on a bad team than second fiddle on a great team. So, and there could be, who knows? We're speculating here. There could be
totally speculating,
personal reasons, family reasons, who knows? But, from a football perspective, that's tough.
But another statistic that stood out to me in this one is going back to the pass rush. Sac State, who right now, I mean, you look at Sac State's defense, they've been pretty good. I mean, in terms of defensive categories, like they're doing a pretty good job of getting sacks. They're fifth in the conference at keeping their quarterback upright. But then they are 11 out of 12 at getting sacks themselves. They didn't have a sack in this game. And so it feels like their defense is elsewhere. When you look at that, you go like, okay, so what's going on then, Colby? Why do we think that Sac State is so dominant? And I think that the answer is just because their offense is so prolific. They have the best offense overall in the Big Sky and the fourth best defense overall in the Big Sky. And so you take those two things together and it's like, yeah. But then I also look at the points that they've given up this far this season, and nobody's really scoring a ton of points on them. And so, I mean, Parlay, do you feel like that's a function of the schedule, because they have played teams like Utah Tech? They've played some teams that have been pretty soft. We talked about Northern Colorado, of course. I think they played Poly last weekend. Just like kind of bottom feeding a little bit. How real is this Sac State defense, and will it be able to hang when the time comes against the Montanas and the Weber States of the Big Sky Conference?
Boy, it's hard to say. I mean,
of course,
they're holding Colorado State to 10 points. They stink, but still an FBS school on the road. UNI held them to 21. I don't know if UNI's offense is too good this year, but still, good team on the road.
A Valley team, yeah.
Cal Poly giving up 21, that sounds like it could be bad, but I watched a bit of that game between Cal Poly and NAU, and Cal Poly, they can throw the ball up. So maybe, you talk about the sack numbers with Sac State, is if they're playing ahead by that much, teams are passing. And, and this is purely just speculation. Going off because I haven't watched really anything with Sac. Haven't watched any replays, haven't watched anything live. So, you would think, though, if they're up by 20, 30, teams are going to pass a lot. So they should, if they're talented on the line, they should be getting some sacks, right? So maybe that is their weakness. And look at this. We get to maybe find out here. Eastern hosts them this weekend. And Eastern, they've gone through a gauntlet, but they're still talented. They still play well at home. So I think this one is going to be it could be an interesting game. And we'll find out some of these questions you were just asking me.
Yeah, because you mentioned Poly's passing game. I mean, folks who don't follow the Big Sky may not know this, but right now, Poly has the best passing offense in the conference, surprisingly. They're averaging
old option team.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so with Bo Baldwin there now, things are changing a little bit. Yeah. They're changing the way that they do stuff, but they're averaging 337 yards a game through the air, or 334 yards, through the air. I mean, that leads the conference right now, far and away. The next closest is actually Sac State themselves at 265 yards a game through the air. So it's clear that that's a thing. But then the funny thing is, you look defensively on the other side of the ball, Sac is almost dead last in the conference at defending the pass. They're giving up 267 yards a game.
Well, that makes sense because they're playing way ahead. So teams are airing it out. So giving up yards makes sense. But not having the sacks, some of those stats, that's a little, could be concerning. Could be, who knows? Their schedule coming up at Eastern, home versus Montana, home versus Idaho, at Weber. I think we're going to find out in those 4 weeks, how good they are.
Yeah. And I think that somebody said that the Hornets had never won on the Inferno. So this could be potentially the first time they win on the red turf in Cheney. We'll have to see how things go. But going back to the stats, like you said, yardage is one thing. Looking at some of the others, I mean, they've only given up 7 passing touchdowns this year. They've also got 6 picks, which is, near the top of the conference right now. Obviously, Montana State with 8 and Weber with 11. That's the top of the conference, but 6 is a respectable number in the conference. And so you're right. Like, yeah, teams are going to air it out because they're playing ahead so much. And by virtue of that, but it's not like teams are scoring a bunch of points through the air on them either. So it's both sides a little bit.
And, if someone knowledgeable like Mike or Brent were here, they might say, they've been playing mobile quarterbacks, so they're harder to sack. I don't know. That's, again, full disclosure. I'm a little bit behind so far this year. I'm starting to buckle down and watch these games and, be a little better commentator here. But, hopefully I can still offer some good gambling advice.
Yeah. So, Sac, like we said, taking the trip up to Ewood, I think that's going to be an interesting game to watch. We'll have to see. The Eagles hurting badly right now, but I mean, like you said, Parlay, that schedule has been brutal. I believe that they will end with the most difficult schedule in the country when all is said and done.
For sure.
So let's move on to the last one here. Eastern Washington taking the trip to Ogden to take on the Wildcats. This is a homecoming game for the Wildcats. Wildcats coming off of a bye, and so being a Weber State expert, if you don't know, Weber State has had this weird history under the Jay Hill where they come out of the bye week flat. It's happened. They've lost games coming out of the bye week that they should win, and it's been really weird. And they've tried, if you've heard Coach Jay Hill talk about it, they've tried changing things, having practice, not having practice, doing this, doing that, and they haven't been able to quite crack the code on that. So there were some concerns going into this game from Wildcat fans that maybe the Wildcats were going to have a scare put into them because of that dreaded bye week dip that they traditionally have. For, I think, the one X factor to all this was new offensive coordinator Mickey Mental, because Mental coming out and running the offense, this is his first season at Weber State, and I felt like if Mental can come out and get the offense going early, it should assuage some of the fears and also should give the team some confidence. And that is exactly what we saw. Second play of the game, Bronson Barron goes 65 yards to Ty McPherson, touchdown. And so I was like, oh, okay, we're playing football. They come out swinging, like, my goodness. And so it was just like, oh, okay, like maybe this whole slump thing isn't going to happen today. But I've talked a lot about this. Parlay, did you have a chance to kind of go through this? Tell me your thoughts on this Ewu-Weber matchup.
Well, I was laughing while you brought up that first touchdown because, as you might remember in the chat, I like the under. Anytime Weber's in a game, that's probably stupid, but I just looked at, that Weber's played such a tough schedule. Eastern has, and Weber's got such a great defense, and coming off a bye, they might be a little sluggish on offense. Weber struggles to score except against bad defenses. They always know how to score against bad defenses, and Eastern's is historically not that good. So that was the risk, but I still like the under. It was sitting at 65 and a half, 66 on some books, and my friend bet it at 66 and a half, so he won. But when that touchdown is scored 14 seconds into the game, and then Weber answers, 3.5 minutes later, I was like, oh boy, and it was just quick hits. And then it still I was almost able to cash on my numbers of 65 and a half until Chris Jackson scored with 1:35 left. I don't know what they were doing there to getting a kid a touchdown, I guess, but they were already up big. But, the big thing I took away from it is that Eastern's still good. They're got, this schedule's just brutal, but Weber is better this year. That bye week, maybe they were caught a little off guard in the first half, but second half they showed their true colors, that they are the better team. They've got an elite defense in the Big Sky and the FCS as a whole, and all those bye week rust was washed away in the second half. They made the adjustments they needed to make. They gave me some hope on the under in the second half before they stole that hope from me at the end with their own touchdown. But They held Eastern to one touchdown in the second half. I don't care how many guys Eastern's lost from last year or what their schedule's like. That's an accomplishment when you can hold the Eagles to one touchdown in a half. Um, you know, they scored with 7 minutes left in the third quarter. The Eastern did not score again in that football game. So, what looked like a close game would probably, I don't know how nervous you were at all in the first half or at halftime. Were you nervous at halftime? Did you feel like this game could be lost, or did you feel like we're better? We're gonna win this thing. What were your thoughts at halftime?
So obviously, the Wildcats, and this has been a theme I think throughout the season, is that the Wildcats have missed opportunities. They go in up 21-14 at halftime. Some missed opportunities. There was a goal line stand by the Eagles. Wildcats were on the 1 yard line, did not punch it through and turn the ball over on downs on the 1 yard line to the Eastern Washington run defense, which is the worst in the conference. Stunning, right? Like, what's going on here? What even is that? But the thing that I do want to point out is that in the second half, like you said, the Wildcats gave up just one touchdown. That touchdown was a bad snap that was a fumble and a scoop and score. They did not give up an offensive touchdown to the Eagles in the second half. So one of the things we like to talk about in Ogden is that Jay Hill is the master of second half adjustments. I think a prime example of this is if you follow the Wildcats in 2019, they played Kennesaw State in Ogden in the playoffs. I think it was the first round. It might have been the second round because we made the quarters that year.
Yeah,
and we played Maine in the next game.
Was it?
Yeah.
Was it?
Yeah.
Their first game, but Kennesaw's second game. I think
that's right.
Is what it was.
Kennesaw being an option team that year, they had a lot of success on the edges in the first half. Second half, Jay Hill shut them down. They had no success. That was just taken away, and they didn't do very much after that. And so there was confidence, I think, in Ogden that from what we've seen so far, I mean, they are very good at making those adjustments defensively to keep the other team from scoring, right? So even if the offense is a little bit anemic, like we saw against Davis holds the Wildcats to just 17 points. It's their lowest all season. The defensive adjustments were enough that Davis did not score in the second half. And so that was enough. Or actually, they might have scored like a field goal or something, but like that was it. They keep teams out of the red zone. And when they do make it into the red zone, they make sure that they take it away. So looking at some of that right now, the Wildcats have the best red zone defense in the conference. Of the 12 visits that the opposing team has been there, only 6 have resulted in a score. Only 3 of those a touchdown. So just elite numbers when the chips are down. But the first half, I think Wildcat fans may be a little bit nervous because things had not gone their way. The offense was playing better than it had against Davis a couple of weeks before, but had missed some big opportunities to go up massively. And so still some kinks to work out in the new Mickey mental scheme. Another thing I wanted to bring up here, Parlay, is that we talked about the fact that Eastern has the worst run defense in the conference. I think for Wildcat fans, they were looking forward to that because the Wildcats traditionally have very good running backs, and that was the case. You had Damon Bankston, the sophomore out of Texas, 14 carries, 94 yards, averaging 6.7. Our guy Dante McMillan, sophomore running back out of Washington State. He had 9 carries for 93 yards. That's 10.3 average, and a couple of touchdowns. We had Dante McMillan on the show on Weber State Weekly this week to talk a little bit about that. And I mean, DMAC is feeling really good, but we saw Josh Davis go down, who, is very good. I always say he's very good on the edges. Josh Davis, he's good in space. He's not as good running through the tackles, and he ended up getting injured again. That's been a problem for him. But yeah, the running game, I think that Wildcat fans felt confident going into this one that we were going to be able to move the ball. But I think that the thing that we've seen that has surprised Wildcat fans maybe is the play of Bronson Barron. Bronson Barron had been okay the last couple of seasons with new offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach Mickey Mental. his numbers have greatly improved. And now he's currently sitting in the conference, I think at number 2 or 3 in the conference right now in passing. Oh, he's actually 4 now because RJ Martinez down in Northern Arizona had a really great game. But I mean, last season, Barron was near the bottom of the conference in passing yards. So to see him all of a sudden jump up into the top 4 in the conference, marked difference from the offenses the Wildcat fans have seen in the past few seasons.
They put up a very balanced attack against Eastern, 237 in the air, 223 on the ground. And that's what you want to see from a team. So, yeah, Northern, I watched that Northern Cal Poly game like I said earlier, and you just had 2 teams that were airing it out and didn't have much defense. So, they're going to put up. It looked good. It was entertaining, but I don't see either team doing that against a Weber, against the Grizzlies, against Sac State. So, a lot of this is just speculation right now, and at least we get to find out, on the field in the next 2 to 3 weeks.
Yeah. So Wildcats ended up taking care of business in the second half. They go on just a hot streak, and they score 24 points in the second half to pull away. Of course, like we said, Eastern getting just that one scoop and score touchdown on a fumble, and that's it. That's their offensive production in the second half. So Wildcats pull away, ruining your over-under, which, sorry, man. Sorry about that. But
you can't win them all.
Yeah, it is what it is. And I mean, I totally understand the bet because in years past, the Wildcat offense has been middling at best. And so you take those unders, right? Because you know that it's going to be a grinded out defensive style of play. That's what the Wildcats are famous for. But with new coach, offensive coordinator, Mickey Mental, it's a new sheriff in town and a new offense. So we'll see how it continues to progress because we're just not used to that in Ogden. It's been a while.
It's fun to see because, it's like, goodness gracious, that Montana State Weber game last year, it was
grinded out.
Really enjoy watching those games, and so if either of those teams can move the ball, keep, your defense is a lot, at least it seems that way, has stayed a lot stronger year over year than the Bobcats, but both offenses look like they've improved quite a bit. Yeah. And I don't know. I love good defense wins championships, but it's so much more fun when the team you're rooting for can move the damn ball and score some points.
Yeah, that's facts, man. So we'll find out exactly how that looks. There will be a rematch in Bozeman in a couple of weeks between the Wildcats and the Bobcats. We'll see kind of how things stack up because it's a couple of different looks for both squads, I think. But Wildcats taking the trip up to Portland State this weekend to take on the Portland State Vikings, who strangely beat the Wildcats in Ogden last year, pretty much knocking them out of playoff contention. Probably going to remember that going to Portland State this weekend because guys weren't happy. First time the Wildcats had missed the playoffs since 2015.
Yeah, revenge game, and it'll be interesting to see what the spread is, because that's one of those games could be a trap game because you're in between Eastern off a bye, and then they're going, they've got Montana next week or Montana State.
Yeah, we're facing your guys. Yeah,
Montana State. So it's like, that is your typical trap game. That's the one that's really tough as a coach to get your team focused. Especially playing at that high school field out in Portland. But yeah. I don't know if they need extra motivation this year because, like you said, Portland State came Ogden last year, knocked them out of the playoffs. So, I think Weber will be fired up. I see them winning big this weekend.
Yeah, I mean, the thing to me that is important is that this new look Wildcats offense, Portland State currently 9th in the conference in passing defense. The Wildcats sitting at, not prolific. They're sitting at 9th in passing offense right now, but that's because, sort of like the Bobcats, they've had a really productive run game. It has been very balanced, which is what Coach Mickey Mental promised. So yeah, we'll see how things shake out, but depending on how the lines look, might want to take the Wildcats. We'll see. All right, man, let's wrap this up. We've talked about the three, what we felt were most impactful games this week, but let's give offensive MVP and defensive MVP. Parlay, let's start with offense, man. Who in the conference did you feel was the offensive MVP last week?
Well, I kind of have to be a homer here. I mean,
sure.
And, between you, me, and the listeners, maybe I wasn't fully prepared here, but when my guy, who it'll be interesting to see how he's used this week and going forward, when my guy gets, 3 rushing touchdowns as a QB, that's pretty darn good.
Yeah.
Sean Chambers, I'm going to be a homer, but half of that's lack of preparedness. So it's not all being a homer.
No, yeah. I mean, Sean Chambers has been absolutely a revelation for the Bobcats. I totally understand the pick. He continues to impress. And like you said, I think there's going to maybe be some controversy coming up very, very soon because, man, I mean, he's really proved himself. But Touchdown Tommy also proved himself in the playoffs last year and has been very productive. And so we'll just have to kind of see who or how they manage that. But if all else fails and they just end up having Tommy throw the ball and have Chambers run the ball, that's not the worst thing in the world, is it? Because I think it also creates problems for defenses because it's like Chambers can throw the ball too. And so if it's if it's like a quick out and then he actually throws the ball down the field, that's tough. That's really difficult to deal with. Or if he chooses to, because they're going to commit to stopping him in the backfield, it's going to be man coverage and he can throw the ball. So we'll see how it works. But for me, man, I am going to go with Sac State's Cameron Scatabo. I mean, he really had a great game.
Answer.
I mean, he's been great, man. 124 yards on 18 attempts. That's 6.9 yards per carry. Just one touchdown. Like I said, the big thing to me, he lost just 1 yard. That's it. Like, this man is constantly moving forward. And so for me, it's like, man, this guy probably needs a little bit more press because he's been really good. So now let's flip it. Let's go defense, man. Who you feeling is your defensive MVP this week?
Well, let me just, step outside the box here. You could say it's lack of preparedness too, and not knowing the kids, but based off the marquee matchups, the slim pickings, and the actual performance on the field, I'm going with Jay Hill, Grant Duff, and Joe Dale shutting out Eastern's offense in the second half. I mean, Eastern can score.
That's what they do. They're prolific.
I don't care. They don't have EB3 anymore, but it's their mantra is next guy up. They're scary on offense, and to hold them to 0 offensive points in 30 minutes of football is pretty damn impressive. So I'm going to give it to obviously the kids had to make the plays, but adjustments were made, and that's going to be my defensive MVP.
Yeah. So this is going to be my homer pick, actually. Looking at the defenses, I mean, I wanted to go with Callahan O'Reilly. He had a really impactful pick in that game against Idaho State, but I had picked Callahan last week. I'm pretty sure it was last week. But anyway, I had previously picked him, so I was like, I can't pick him again. Like, maybe I'd choose somebody else. So for me, it's going to be sophomore defensive end for the Wildcats, New Celestine. I don't think Wildcat fans, they were a little bit nervous going into the season. We weren't sure how the defensive line was going to shape up. We had some key guys that were lost. We had a transfer away. And so it was just like, who is going to step up into this role? Because George Tarlis goes to Boise State. Jared Sheese, defensive tackle, graduates. He ends up becoming Mr. Wildcat, playing the most games in Wildcat history. So it was like, what's going to happen? And New Celestine has really been a revelation. He comes away with 2 sacks, which is a criticism we've had of this Wildcat squad, that they haven't been getting home quite enough. Wildcats come away with 5 sacks in this game to kind of boost their numbers, to get back in the running and at least have a decent look. And so it's got to be New Celestine for me, man. He was really, really phenomenal in this game. Talkington is a very good quarterback, definitely top of the conference. I think that's an easy argument to make. And Celestine got some pressure on him and really made his day a little bit tough. So that's it, guys. I mean, that's Big Sky Big Takes for this week. Parlay, any parting thoughts before we wrap it up here, man?
I'm just excited that we actually get to see two teams with winning records in the FCS face off for the first time this season next week when Idaho comes to Montana,
Yep.
And a couple other interesting games too. So, the schedule, the season's just getting started as far as I'm concerned.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, it's a good point. Little Brown Stein will be played this weekend in Missoula, and so that'll be a fun matchup. We'll kind of see what Idaho is really all about. This will be their toughest opponent to date, who is not an FBS opponent. They played 2 FBS games this season, but this will be their toughest FCS opponent thus far. And so we'll just kind of see how Coach Eck is dealing with it. And plus, it's the second oldest rivalry, I think, in the country, or at least in the conference. So
that line opened at 8.5. I don't know what that's in Montana, because they list lines early when it comes to the Cats and Grizz. The other national books, they wait. I don't know why it opened at less than 10. It could be that way. Football-wise, maybe it's an 8.5-point spread, but it makes no sense from a betting perspective at Grizz with Montana bettors. It almost instantly went to 14.5. So shout out to those that did get it at 8.5. Someone on the Grizz fan pod might have jumped on it when I told them it was at 8.5, because I don't understand that. 14.5, I don't know. To me, that's a stay away from me. But gosh, if Idaho could keep this close and make things interesting in the fourth quarter, that would be great. That's
confidence builder for them, for sure, right? I mean, huge confidence builder if they can keep it close with the Grizz at the caliber that they are this season at Wash Grizz. I mean, one of the most difficult places to play in the country. We'll see how it works out. But
2 teams off a bye. It's the first half could be interesting.
Yeah, might be a little rust there, but we'll see how it goes. But Montana Parlay, I want to thank you so much for doing Big Sky Big Takes. So, of course, want to thank the FCS Fans Nation Network for letting us do this one. Like we said, co-production with the Big Sky Podcast Network. Make sure to check out FCS Fans Nation. Make sure to check out the Big Sky Podcast Network and all of our fellow podcasts out there. From Weber State Weekly, I'm Colby Peterson. Montana Parlay. I needed to come up with a tagline, and so I'm going with this, man. It's Big Sky, Big Takes.